Family mocked me at my father's funeral, until the will was read aloud. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. Now, let's get into it. My name is Evelyn Dorsey, though most people just call me Evie. I'm in my mid-30s, quiet by nature, and I've always been practical to a fault. Growing up, I never quite fit with my father's side of the family. After my parents divorced, I drifted further from them, partly because my mother raised me far away, and partly because the Dorseys made it clear I wasn't truly one of them. They were the kind of family that prided themselves on appearances, money, and gossip, and I was the one who slipped through the cracks. Walking into that small Midwestern church the morning of his funeral, I felt like I was stepping into enemy territory. I wore a simple black dress, plain, modest, nothing flashy, and that alone became a target. I caught the whispers before the service even began. "She couldn't even dress properly for her own father's funeral?" One aunt muttered. Another cousin smirked. "Well, what do you expect? She never had much." Their words weren't meant to comfort. They were daggers disguised as whispers. I kept my head down, folding my hands tightly in my lap as the organ filled the room. My father's casket sat at the front, polished and imposing, and all I could think about was how strange it felt to mourn someone I'd both loved and resented. We'd had a complicated relationship. After the divorce, he let others, his sisters, his cousins, convince him I wasn't worth his time. Yet in the past couple of years, we'd started talking again. Quietly, without the rest of the family knowing. Those small conversations had meant more to me than anyone realized. But to them, I was still the forgotten daughter. The charity case. The outsider. Marlena, my cousin who always strutted around as though the world owed her something, smirked openly when she caught my eye. "Surprised you showed up," she said during the wake afterward, loud enough for others to hear. "I figured you'd only come if there was something in it for you." Her friends laughed, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to scream that I wasn't there for scraps, that I wasn't some greedy stranger circling a carcass. But I stayed silent. It wasn't the place, and I knew giving them a reaction would only fuel their smug superiority. Instead, I stood near the back, nursing a cup of bad coffee, pretending not to hear the snide comments that floated around me. They thought they knew everything. They thought I was invisible, someone easy to mock and dismiss. None of them had the faintest idea what was coming when we gathered later that afternoon at the lawyer's office. At that moment, I was still the outsider in their eyes. But soon, everything they believed about me, and about my father, would be shattered. The air inside the reception hall felt heavy, as though grief had soured into something cruel. Laughter didn't belong at a wake, yet my cousins and aunts found a way to make it sharp and cutting. Every glance in my direction carried a smirk. Every whispered word was meant to sting. I heard the word charity case, tossed out like a casual remark, followed by muffled chuckles. Another cousin leaned close to her sister and said, "She's the daughter who ran away. What is she even doing here?" Their eyes flicked toward me, daring me to react. I pressed my lips together and focused on the black coffee in my hand, willing myself to remain still. The room wasn't big enough to escape their stares, but I told myself I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. And then Marlena Kittredge made her entrance, as if the gathering existed solely for her. She wore a fitted dress, dripping in jewelry that sparkled with every move. She greeted people like she was the hostess rather than just another mourner. Conversations stopped when she walked by, and she soaked in the attention with ease. Everyone had always whispered that she was the favorite granddaughter, the one who could do no wrong. She spotted me instantly. The smile on her face curled into something mean. "Well, well," she said loud enough for half the room to hear. "Look who finally decided to show up. Did you come for scraps, Evie?" A few relatives nearby laughed, while others looked away awkwardly, unwilling to intervene. Her words stung, not just because of their cruelty, but because they carried an echo of truth I couldn't deny. After my parents' divorce, my father and I had drifted. We never stopped speaking entirely, but our bond had been worn thin by distance, by the interference of relatives who enjoyed reminding him that I wasn't part of their polished world. Still, I respected him. Despite the years apart, he had been my father, and I had chosen to be here to honor that. Marlena didn't stop. She circled me like a cat with a cornered mouse, her voice dripping with mockery. "You must be nervous," she went on. "I mean, everyone knows Dad always favored me. He said I reminded him of his best years." She tilted her head, flashing a grin that showed she knew exactly how to cut deep. I could feel my face growing hot, but I forced myself to remain still, gripping my cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. Inside, anger churned, but I refused to let it spill. This wasn't the time, and it certainly wasn't the place. They wanted a scene. They wanted me to snap, to confirm every story they'd told themselves about the forgotten daughter who didn't belong. So I stayed quiet, swallowing every bitter word that burned my tongue. Outwardly calm, inwardly seething, I promised myself I would not give Marlena or anyone else the satisfaction. The funeral ended with stiff hugs and forced condolences, but by late afternoon, we were herded into the lawyer's office. The waiting area smelled faintly of leather and old paper, and the tension clung to every surface. Relatives filled the room with low chatter, their voices carrying an edge of triumph rather than grief. No one bothered to hide their certainty. This was less about mourning and more about claiming what they believed belonged to them. I found a seat in the corner, away from the bustle. My presence was acknowledged only through sidelong glances, the kind that said I was an intruder in their world. Their circle closed tightly around itself, leaving me outside as though I were little more than a shadow on the wall. Marlena, of course, was the loudest voice in the room. She perched on a chair like it was a throne, legs crossed, nails tapping against her phone as she held court. "The lake house will finally be put to good use," she announced, as if the outcome was already decided. A cousin laughed along, asking if she planned to renovate. "Of course," she replied breezily. "That place is practically mine anyway. Grandpa always said it was wasted just sitting there." Her words flowed easily, sharp with confidence. She didn't stop there. "And the cars, God, I can't wait to get my hands on those classics. They've been rotting in the garage long enough. I'll actually drive them, not let them gather dust." Each remark was met with nods, little chuckles, approval that confirmed her place at the center. I kept my gaze fixed on the patterned carpet, biting down hard on silence. Their voices rose and fell around me, but not a single one addressed me directly. It was as though I didn't exist. My chair might as well have been empty. The air thickened when the door finally opened. A tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes stepped inside, carrying a leather folder under his arm. His presence alone was enough to cut through Marlena's bragging. Conversations stilled, and all attention shifted at once. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "Good afternoon," he said evenly, his tone commanding but calm. "My name is Alden Clark. I'll be reading your father's will." The room quieted completely, every smirk replaced by anticipation. I folded my hands in my lap, drawing in a slow breath. Whatever was about to happen, none of them seemed to doubt the outcome. They were certain, confident, ready to celebrate their gains. I sat in silence, bracing myself, invisible to everyone, except perhaps to Mr. Clark, whose sharp glance briefly swept over the room and lingered, just for a moment, on me. The scrape of a chair against the hardwood floor was the only sound as Mr. Clark settled behind the polished desk and unfolded a stack of papers. He adjusted his glasses, his calm expression unshaken by the eager faces pressed toward him. With measured precision, he began reading the document. Names were called, and with each one, a trinket or keepsake was assigned. An old watch to an uncle, a set of books to an aunt, a framed photograph to a cousin. Small gestures, tokens that carried meaning but little value. The recipients nodded, feigning gratitude, though the disappointment in their eyes betrayed them. The room's energy shifted with each passing line. Murmurs filled the air, subtle at first, then building into restless anticipation. Everyone knew the real treasures were yet to be named, the property, the accounts, the assets that mattered. The silence between Mr. Clark's words stretched taut, the expectation almost tangible. Then came the turning point. His voice steady, he announced that the house, the land, and the investments were being entrusted not to Marlena, not to the favored cousins, but to me. The room fractured in an instant. Gasps cut through the air, followed by the scrape of chairs and a swell of disbelief. A wave of accusations erupted, overlapping in a chaotic chorus. "This has to be a joke. She doesn't deserve any of it. There's no way he meant that." And then Marlena's voice rose above them all, shrill and furious. She shot to her feet, eyes wide with rage. "This is a mistake," she shouted, her hands trembling though her tone tried to carry strength. She barely knew him. She wasn't around. She doesn't belong in this family, let alone in his will. Her voice cracked, the certainty she carried all afternoon unraveling in real time. I couldn't move. My body felt rooted to the chair, hands numb in my lap. The words didn't register at first, as if my ears refused to believe what I'd just heard. My father, distant, complicated, often absent, had left me everything? It didn't make sense. It felt impossible. The noise around me swirled into a blur. Relatives leaned over each other, faces twisted in shock and fury. Marlena's shouting pierced through, demanding answers, demanding the will be read again, insisting it had been tampered with. Mr. Clark held firm, his voice calm and unwavering, repeating only that the document was clear and final. Meanwhile, I sat frozen, struggling to breathe through the storm. My chest tightened, my thoughts collided, and the world around me felt suddenly unreal. The estate, the land, the investments, responsibility I had never expected, now rested entirely on my shoulders. The irony wasn't lost on me. Minutes before, they'd treated me as though I didn't exist. Now every eye in the room was locked on me, burning with disbelief and hatred. I stayed silent, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't yet know how to speak through the shock. The uproar didn't stop when Mr. Clark folded the papers. Instead, it grew louder, pressing in on me from every side. Chairs scraped back as relatives closed the gap, their voices colliding in a mess of outrage. Hands gestured wildly, fingers pointing at me as though I had orchestrated the entire thing. "What did you say to him?" one demanded, leaning so close I could smell the bitterness on her breath. "How did you get him to change his mind?" Another cousin chimed in. "You must have been plotting this for years." Marlena pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with fury. She jabbed a finger toward me, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You manipulated him. Don't you dare stand there acting innocent. You tricked a dying man into handing everything over to you." Her words dripped venom, each syllable meant to strip me bare in front of the others. I shook my head quickly, my voice trembling but firm. "I didn't know. I swear, I had no idea about any of this." My words seemed to vanish in the noise, swallowed by their refusal to believe me. Every protest I made only fueled their anger, as though my denial was proof of guilt. The accusations multiplied, a storm of voices drowning me out. "She's a liar. A thief. She doesn't deserve a dime." Someone knocked against my chair, making it jolt backward, and I clutched the armrest just to stay steady. Marlena's eyes gleamed with rage, and she spat out the word that sealed the family's verdict against me. "Thief." It echoed, picked up by others until it became a chant, a label they wore like armor as they turned against me in unison. One by one, they stormed toward the door, muttering curses under their breath. Purses snapped shut, coats were yanked from hooks, and the room emptied with the kind of bitterness that left the air colder in their absence. Marlena was the last to leave, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. She paused in the doorway long enough to sneer, "You'll regret this," before disappearing into the hall. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. My hands trembled in my lap, the adrenaline still coursing through me, even though the storm had passed. For the first time since the reading began, I lifted my gaze to Mr. Clark. He studied me calmly, his expression steady, almost reassuring. "Miss Dorsey," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority, "your father's wishes were clear. Every word in that document was deliberate. He knew exactly what he wanted." The reassurance steadied me, even as the room still buzzed with the echoes of accusations. I nodded faintly, clutching onto his words like a lifeline. Whatever storm my relatives tried to unleash, the truth was fixed in ink. And for the first time, I let myself breathe. The lawyer's words lingered in my mind, steadying me as the room around me emptied of noise. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was no longer in that office. I was back in the dim glow of my father's living room, months before all this began. The evenings had been quiet. He would sit in his worn armchair, the one with the faded fabric, while I perched on the couch with a cup of tea. No one else was around, no cousins, no aunts, no Marlena. Just him and me. For the first time in years, we spoke without the walls built by other people's opinions. One night, he leaned forward, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I owe you an apology, Evie," he said, eyes heavy with regret. "I let them fill my head with lies about you. I should have known better. I should have seen you for who you really are, not who they told me you were." His words cracked something inside me I didn't know I'd been holding all these years. We talked for hours that night, and the next, and the one after. He confessed how much he hated the way money had twisted the family. How every visit from them felt like a transaction, another way for them to angle for favors or handouts. His disappointment wasn't hidden. It spilled out of him like something he'd been carrying for decades. They never cared about the land or the house or even me, he admitted. They only saw dollar signs. I remember staring into the firelight, feeling the weight of his words. He didn't just want to leave things behind. He wanted to leave them with purpose. You're the only one I can trust with it, he told me one evening, his eyes fixed on mine. You'll see the value in what it means, not just what it's worth. Those moments replayed now, sharper than ever, and I understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't a mistake. It was his way of making amends, of placing trust in me after years of distance. He knew exactly what he was doing. The faces of my relatives flashed in my memory, their greed, their laughter, their cruelty at the wake. He had seen it too. He had been disappointed, disgusted even, with the legacy they cared nothing for. That disappointment had fueled his choice, and now it lived in ink on the will. I opened my eyes slowly, back in the sterile office, the lawyer's calm presence still beside me. My chest tightened, but it wasn't with fear anymore. It was with the certainty that my father had entrusted me with more than possessions. He had given me a responsibility, a chance to guard what he believed mattered most. And for the first time since his death, I felt like I understood his final gift. News traveled fast in a small town, but Marlena made sure it spread even faster. Within days, whispers began curling through the diner, the post office, the grocery store. People glanced at me differently, their looks laced with suspicion, because Marlena had already poisoned their ears. She told anyone who would listen that I had cornered my father in his final days, that I had manipulated him into rewriting his will. According to her, I'd stolen everything with cunning and deceit. The lies festered quickly. Old neighbors who once smiled politely now crossed the street to avoid me. Clerks hesitated to meet my eyes when I bought milk or bread. Even people who barely knew our family seemed eager to believe her story. It didn't stop with gossip. Relatives began showing up at the property, stomping across the porch as though they still owned it. They banged on the door, demanding what they claimed was rightfully theirs. One uncle leaned close enough that I could see the spit at the corner of his mouth when he shouted, "You can't keep it all for yourself. We're family, we deserve our share." Others circled the yard, peering through windows like vultures circling prey. Each encounter chipped away at my calm, but none rattled me as much as the night Marlena herself appeared. She pulled up in her shiny car, stepping out with the same smug air she'd worn at the wake. Only this time, there was venom in her smile. She strode up the walkway without hesitation, her heels striking the pavement like gunfire. "You really think this is over?" she hissed, standing inches from me on the porch. "You think a piece of paper is enough to erase me?" Her eyes blazed as she leaned closer. "I'll drag this through court until you're penniless. I'll make sure the whole town knows what kind of parasite you are." For a moment, her words threatened to unravel me. The weight of her hatred pressed hard, the thought of a public battle clawing at my resolve. But beneath the fear, something steadier rose up, a spark that told me I couldn't afford to retreat. Not now. Not after everything. I straightened my shoulders, meeting her glare with quiet defiance. "Do what you have to do, Marlena," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "But I'm not stepping aside." The tension crackled between us, sharp and dangerous. For the first time, I saw her falter, her expression twisting when she realized I wasn't going to fold. With a scoff, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, tires screeching as she sped into the night. The silence that followed was deafening. My hands trembled, but I refused to let the fear win. Whatever storm Marlena planned to unleash, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to back down. The courthouse was cold, its high ceilings echoing every word spoken. I sat at the long wooden table beside Mr. Clark, my palms pressed together so tightly they ached. Across the aisle, Marlena looked composed, her hair perfectly styled, her dress chosen to command sympathy. She wore the mask of a grieving granddaughter wronged by deceit, and for a moment, I worried people might believe her performance. Her attorney painted me as a manipulator, claiming I had taken advantage of a frail old man. He spoke of coercion, of influence, of betrayal cloaked in false kindness. Marlena nodded along, eyes glistening as though she might cry. It was a carefully rehearsed show, one designed to sway hearts. But when the witnesses were called, the cracks began to show. A neighbor took the stand first, a woman who had lived beside my father for years. She spoke of seeing me at the house often, sitting on the porch with him, bringing groceries, walking slowly with him down the path. She never asked for anything, the woman said firmly. She was just there for him. Another voice followed, an old friend of my father's who had visited during Marlena's loud visits. He recalled her dismissive remarks, the way she laughed at his ailments, the way she rolled her eyes when he tried to reminisce. She treated him like a burden, he said flatly. The courtroom murmured, the mask Marlena wore beginning to slip. Then Mr. Clark rose with a calm certainty that filled the room. From his case, he pulled a set of letters, each one signed in my father's hand. He read aloud passages where my father wrote of his intentions, his desire to entrust his estate to me. The words were clear, unambiguous. He had thought long and hard about his decision, and he wanted no doubt left behind. The silence that followed was heavy. Marlena's attorney tried to argue forgery, but the handwriting was authenticated on the spot. Every letter became a nail in the coffin of her claim. I watched as her composure cracked. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by a tight, furious scowl. She whispered sharply to her lawyer, but the damage was done. What she had spun as betrayal now looked unmistakably like greed. The jury of eyes in that room saw it for what it was. When the judge finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of finality. He declared the will valid, the challenge dismissed. My father's wishes would stand. Relief flooded through me, so sharp it almost brought tears. Across the aisle, Marlena's chair scraped as she stood abruptly, fury radiating from her every movement. She didn't wait for the judge to finish before storming out, heels striking the floor in angry rhythm. I stayed seated, breathing deeply, letting the victory settle over me. It wasn't triumph in the way of gloating. It was vindication, quiet and steady. My father's choice had been defended, and for the first time, I felt like the weight of his trust had truly been honored. Word spread quickly after the ruling. In a town where everyone knew each other's business, Marlena's defeat became the story whispered in coffee shops, muttered at church, and passed around on front porches. What she had thought would elevate her only dragged her down. Relatives who once stood behind her began to avoid her, unwilling to be tied to the humiliation she had brought upon their name. Invitations stopped arriving, calls went unanswered, and one by one, the allies she had boasted about quietly slipped away. Without the shield of family loyalty, her social circle thinned. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to stand beside someone whose greed had been laid bare in such a public way. What had been pride in her voice turned into bitterness, her laughter replaced by venom. Rumors followed her everywhere, and though she tried to hold her head high, the sideways glances in grocery aisles told the truth. Her reputation was no longer intact. Meanwhile, I chose silence. There was no victory parade, no words to twist the knife. Instead, I kept to my father's estate, finding solace in the quiet work of restoration. The walls carried his memory, the land his intentions. With every repaired fence post, every freshly painted room, I felt him closer, as though I was keeping his promise alive. It wasn't about ownership. It was about stewardship, about honoring what he had trusted me with. In time, some relatives reached out. Their words were cautious, almost halting, laced with guilt for how they had treated me. A few admitted shame at believing Marlena's stories, at turning their backs so quickly. I didn't offer grand forgiveness, only a nod, a willingness to let the past soften without being forgotten. The house grew warmer as repairs finished, not just with fresh paint, but with peace. Where there had once been tension and hostility, now there was a steady calm. Marlena faded from the edges of our lives, while I stepped fully into the role my father had asked of me. Caretaker, protector, the one who valued what could not be measured in money. Evening light spilled across the porch as Evie stood with the photograph in her hands. Her father's face looked back at her from the frame, surrounded by relatives who once laughed at her presence. She traced the edge with her thumb, the quiet hum of cicadas filling the silence around her. Leaning closer, she whispered softly, almost as if speaking directly to him, "I hope I did right by you." The words carried into the still air, steady and certain. From the road below, headlights cut through the dusk. A familiar car slowed, the driver craning her neck as if unwilling to let go of what could have been. Marlena's eyes locked on the porch, bitterness written in every line of her face. She lingered just long enough to see Evie standing tall, the home secure beneath her care. No words were exchanged, no gestures made, just the heavy truth settling between them. Marlena rolled forward, swallowed by the dark, while Evie remained where she was, unmoved. There was no gloating, no outward triumph. The victory was quiet, found not in shouts or vengeance, but in keeping faith with the man who had finally trusted her. By holding to his wishes, she had answered the cruelty of the past without lifting a hand. Revenge had come, not through plotting, but through dignity, unseen, undeniable, and permanent. As she stepped back inside, the picture still in her grasp, Evie felt the circle complete. They had mocked her at the funeral, dismissed her as nothing. Yet here she stood, vindicated, carrying forward the legacy that was meant for her. The house creaked softly, almost like a sigh of approval. And in that moment, she knew she had already spoken the only words that mattered. Do you think I handled it the right way by standing my ground, or should I have tried to reconcile with them? Let me know in the comments. I'd love your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.